Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 112, amazingly, of the Near Memo with me, Mike Blumenthal, and our special, very, very special guest, Claire Carlisle from Bright Local. And I think Claire Carlisle Marketing, I think that you were our first non-internal guest way back when, at some point in the past. But so welcome back. And today we are going to be talking about the Google Business Profile, Google Knowledge Panel, and all the various elements there, and then kind of hedging in a kind of a larger context. Where does this situated in the context of a broader local digital marketing strategy? So, Claire, do you want to say anything about yourself before we jump into the discussion? I'm not good at introductions. Claire was born in Wales and fill in the blank.
No, I wasn't. Claire wasn't born in Wales, but Claire lives in Wales. But that's good. That's fine.
Where were you in fact born?
I was born in the big city of London.
Oh.
Just 21 years ago. So, and now I live in Wales. And I am a local search expert at Bright Local. I also run my own small consultancy, Claire Carlisle Marketing, and I'm a marketer and I like doing local SEO.
And you're also a local SEO prodigy at just 21, right?
Yeah, that's right. I basically, as soon as I was born, I was straight into Google business world, as we called it back then, and I haven't looked back.
So let's you recently gave a very, very well received presentation at Brighton SEO on Google. I'm going to botch the title, but Google Business Profile as the CMS you didn't know you had, something like that. You can You can correct me on the verbatim title.
Okay,
but,
it was Google's local knowledge panel, the CMS you never knew you had.
Okay, better, more eloquent. So what does that mean? What does that mean, the CMS that you never knew you had?
I think that it in part comes from the idea of the phrase which originated with a very dear friend of mine called Mike Blumenthal, who talked about Google as your new homepage, but not in the sense that there is so much that you can do, especially from the business profile. For a business. So it's a bit like going to a website because you can do all of these actions in one place. So for a lot of, especially small businesses, the fact that you have this very big real estate, which is the knowledge panel, which populates with business profile information. The question is, how do I change this? And how do I get this to show here? The same way that we would do with the CMS for our business website, we need to think about the knowledge panel and how Google Business Profile feeds into that as if it were a CMS. That was a long answer.
That's fine. Long answers are okay. We're a long form podcast. But the difference between a traditional CMS and Google Business Profile is that with a traditional CMS, all the information is in one place and you have total control over it, and that is absolutely not the case with Google Business Profile.
And the other difference is that in a traditional CMS, the hierarchy of menu items is very logical. In this CMS, if you're trying to find something, good luck.
Yeah. So my point was, when we work with websites, we're very used to knowing where things are, having a very clear visual style guide, things always being in the same place, apart from when your WordPress updates or something weird happens. And that's the thing. Obviously, Google isn't our new homepage because we don't have access to the CMS, and basically other people have access to our CMS. If we're treating Google as our new homepage, our competitors, users, anyone can post anything on our new homepage. So that was the sort of concept that I was exploring.
And in fact, there may be ads that you have no control over that show up.
Yeah, ads too. Happy days.
Well, so one of the things that struck me about your Brighton SEO presentation, which we'll include a link to in our transcript when we post this, was just how dense the knowledge panel has become. How much information is there? It's really kind of overwhelming in a certain way if you dive into it. I mean, give us a kind of high level overview now of all the major components that are showing up. And I know there's variation by vertical, but what what are the big pieces that people need to be aware of?
I think one of the things in these cases is always language and the way that we refer to things, the names that we place on things. So we have referred to the way that our business appears on the desktop on the right hand side as your business profile. The knowledge panel has been thought of as something separately for an entity that doesn't have a local presence. And then language is changing. So I interviewed, in a way, Andrea Volpini from WordLift to try for me to understand the language of knowledge panel and knowledge graph. So if I say anything wrong, it's not his fault, it's mine. So I can't remember the original question now. Where am I going with this? There's a lot of information in there. And with local businesses, we are used to seeing, it's name, address, phone number, your photos are at the top, and we've got Google posts, and we might have products, and we've got reviews, we might have ads. There's a lot of stuff in there. And then more and more, in my experience, I'm seeing information pulled in. So it becomes a little bit more of a hybrid knowledge panel, where it's bringing in information from Google's knowledge about that entity, which could be from Wikipedia, it could be other places. So rather than having a fixed mindset in terms of this is what a local knowledge panel will look like, we need to start thinking about, well, that's what it might look like now in this country at this time from this location, but that's not what it looks like everywhere, and that's not how it always will look.
Right. It's very changeable and dynamic and requires constant attention. So talk about the distinction between the knowledge panel and Google Business Profile. And Mike, feel free to jump in at any point here.
Sure. Or just jump in from the start, Mike.
What are the primary distinctions between the knowledge panel and Google Business Profile? Because I have a tendency to conflate the two, but they're not the same, obviously.
My understanding is that Google Business Profile is like a Google-owned source of information that can feed into Google's knowledge graph and Google's understanding of an entity. So it's just one of the data sources. Unfortunately, as business owners, when we claim those listings, can have quite a big impact on that data and what gets pulled into that. Whereas the knowledge graph and knowledge panels are based around Google's understanding of various entities, and it could push in lots of different sources of data into that.
So I would back up just a little bit. When the knowledge graph came out in 2012, the knowledge panel was any representation of people, places, and things extracted from that knowledge graph. And as Claire points out, one source for data for that knowledge graph is the business profile data, but that we used to call in local, back when I was 21, we used to call what Google now rebranded as a business profile, we called it a knowledge panel. And it was a form of knowledge panel. And Google has never, what Claire is now seeing in some of her clients is something that's existed. For example, I had a client, SeaWorld, back when they used to have captive whales. My kids gave me all kinds of crap about being their consultant, but that being said, they had a Wikipedia page way back when, and they had a knowledge panel that merged local and brand data, and as far back as 2013 is when I was consulting. So this merging of data from brand resources in the knowledge graph or local resources in the knowledge graph has been going on for a long time. It's just that now we're seeing it more because there are more brands that have achieved that sort of status or have a Wikipedia page, and Google has no qualms about merging a brand and a local panel when the query demands it. So I've seen it with hospitals. I've seen it with these large tourism sites. You don't typically see it with the Barbara Olivers of the world because they can't get a Wikipedia page. But the few that have a Wikipedia page, you might see it. So this goes way back. Again, I think it's more prevalent now because the data in the system has evolved so that it happens more.
So beyond Wikipedia, where are the primary sources of data that Google is getting to populate these knowledge panels? I mean, where do you need to pay attention, in other words, and kind of take control of that information if at all possible?
I haven't got my little thing in front of me, but there's various Google sources. So I think with, news, Google Scholar, the books. So there's all these Google owned parts. And then there's Wikipedia, Wikidata, and then there are lots of much smaller third-party sites. So often those are the ones that are a little bit harder to know. That's my understanding. Mike, probably.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, there's sites like IMDb, authoritative sites, lyric sites, and these may relate to a local entity. And when they do, Google will merge these sort of structured data elements in. It's very vertical dependent, and get the most prominent of these is Wikipedia, but it's hard to get. But this in the past, you often saw. One of the things you used to see in the past was quite weird was there'd be a Wikipedia entry on a school shooting, and the school local panel would pick that up, and you'd see a merged profile.
Only in the U.S. Only in the U.S. though, of course.
But that's because all these school shootings were here, or most of them.
Right.
Now
I'm that's what I'm saying.
Behavior everywhere, though. I think so. Anyway.
But this is different than citations, right? I mean, there's a bunch of companies, Yext and others, still out there. My former company, Uberall, that are selling, data syndication and local citations essentially. And this is a different issue from what you're describing. All these third-party entities, right? You're not endorsing, hey, you got to go be listed on 1,000 of these no-name directories that nobody's using. That's not what you're saying, correct? Okay. No. All right. go, please elaborate.
Well, it depends. I would love to link to the. I've got a graphic. Actually, it's a Jason Barnard graphic, which talks about the sources of information that gets pulled into the knowledge graph. And the small little segment which he is talking about is like the unknown or the unknowable in some ways. So that's why it comes round to the point, which is thinking that you're going to play whack-a-mole with suppressing information from lots of different sites that could or could not at some point, feed into the knowledge graph. It's better to actually work out what you need to publish on your own site by understanding the fabric of the data that Google is pulling into knowledge panels, which I go into in my deck. So it's better to just understand the type of information that Google thinks is relevant, rather than thinking about, I need to make sure it's correct on this site. I need to make sure it's correct on this site. Don't worry about those sites. Well, worry about your own site. Worry about your entity home.
So how does the consideration so Google is getting, just confirm, of course, that Google is getting data from your own website. I mean, that's maybe self-evident, but maybe not entirely self-evident. What should you be doing on your site to maximize the likelihood that Google is improving, is pulling in that data to the business profile or to the knowledge panel?
But we start with the basics of not even thinking about if you've got like a hybrid knowledge panel. It's all of the things that we sort of think obviously need to match between your website and Google Business Profile. So your name, address, phone number, opening hours. One would hope that your products and services will be somewhere on your website, if not linked to from your location landing page. So there just needs to be that general match between all of the basics of your actual offering. So name, address, etc., and then the sort of features of your business, and then beyond that, if we're actually thinking about when you have these more hybrid knowledge panels, looking at your own knowledge panel, looking at your competitors' knowledge panels, looking at really large entities within the space. Say, for example, a zoo. I could look at zoos all over the world and start to understand what they're pulling in from each of those, probably led by Wikipedia, but some of it isn't led by Wikipedia. It's especially like in the example that I give, the notable animals section, it isn't pulled straight from Wikipedia. I think that in part is coming from Google News. It's coming from news articles. I haven't solved that conundrum, but I do know that if Google is interested in what animals are notable at an establishment, whether they're alive or whether they're dead, then maybe I should own some of that content and have that content on my website.
One of the things that really struck me, that I'm struck by just as a user, and then that jumped out at me with your presentation, your Brighton SEO presentation, is just, as I alluded to a few minutes ago, it's kind of the density of information and the plethora of information now that's on the knowledge panel, and we don't really know what users are interacting with. Of course, Google does, and presumably Google has factored that into the structure of the page, but we don't really know. We're talking about Q&A and appointment links and NAP information and photos and all of this stuff, but there's no good research that I'm aware of that talks about where consumers are focused in their investigation of local business alternatives.
And
any thoughts on that, Mike or
yeah,
Claire?
I mean, just so David and you and I secondarily initiated consumer behavior research in the SERPs for a client a couple months ago, and what we saw when we recorded their behaviors, they were given a broad task they had a workplace problem and they had to identify a solution using Google search. And when we saw them follow these tasks, one of the things that we noticed was that they were very taken by behavioral influences like social proof reviews and they would scroll down the page and see reviews as schema. They'd scroll back up to look at reviews in the pack. They were very taken by things like years in business, whether they were in the meta description or whether it was in the Google pack. They were very much, and they moved very fluidly between all of this. It was as Google did some research about a year ago called the messy middle, where they generated 100,000 shopping situations around 1,000 users. And when I went back and read that research the other day, after having done ours, what we saw was very similar to that behavioral signals are, or these sort of, all of these behavioral signals are incredibly important to consumers. So much, and we saw that in our search much more so. Now, some people did do this behavior where they'd identify somebody, like maybe an organic, and they'd go back and they'd do a brand search and they'd explore the local panel. And I always suspected they did this, and it's probably longer tail behavior, but they went back and then explored the brand's knowledge panel, the business profile, for things like reviews, years in business, and these other stuff. So in that situation, all of these features might have been seen, but they particularly focused on free consultations, years in service, reviews were the three that came up time and again in our research.
Yeah, this was a particular professional services category.
Professional services. But I think in anything other than a cup of coffee, I think these things probably have an influence.
Claire, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how this sort of black box of consumer behavior, and we often base everything on the premise that, well, Google has access to this data, therefore Google is likely to add features that will make sense and will have some sort of positive impact. And then I think of this example of this notable animals feature that happens across zoos. And then, so you would click on one of the notable animals, which then populates a search just for the name of that animal. But it won't be Luna the lion from Folly Farm. It will just be Luna. So it would take me to a search on cryptocurrency. So in terms of the entities and relationships, because that's one of the things that the knowledge graph should allow us to do, which is this idea that it's, things, not strings, and I should be able to click to the next part and go on this journey. It's actually taken me to somewhere totally unrelated from my knowledge panel. So I'd like to see, just in terms of how is that a useful feature for a potential customer? It's just not. So that's what I was thinking about then.
So you're questioning the logic of including all these different elements at some level.
I think there is logic. There could be logic, but then you need to, as a business, I'm clicking on those links and wondering, well, on some searches, it could be Luna, the African lion. If I was owning that search, then I would get my search results there. But if I have published nothing on that subject, it's much more likely to default to whatever the Google thinks is the most appropriate results to display for that. So it's sort of along the lines of you have to go and do the investigation as a business. Obviously, most businesses aren't going to be able to do this, but you need to think about when you name your animals, don't just call it Bob. You're going to need, it's like when we name our businesses, name something which is unique that you can own.
Keyword stuffing for animal names in zoos.
That's what we need. So we need Bob the best bear in Wales. And then, because I can own that as a search phrase.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.